Hi everyone. A lot of you have heard some of the headlines in the past year with Airbnb. Examples such as Airbnb guest felt sick after she found a hidden camera, host harassment after a 5-star stay, misled by rental description of quote unquote entire home. These are just a few of hundreds and hundreds of horror stories that people encounter while using Airbnb throughout their different trips that they take. All that being said, for me, I've stayed in multiple Airbnbs that have been some of the most incredible experiences that I've ever had when I've taken trips. Today, we'll talk about the pros and cons of Airbnb, how you can filter through Airbnbs to make sure that you've picked a winner every single time, what red flags that you're supposed to look for, and what resources there are if there is a problem with your stay. My name is Evan, and I'm a travel risk manager who's advised hundreds of travelers on travel safety and security on trips that they've taken around the globe. The first thing we're going to speak about is pros and cons for Airbnb. So just to start, I wanted to give a brief overview of what Airbnb is, if you're not familiar already. It's a platform that allows property owners, who are known as hosts in sort of Airbnb speak, to post their property for potential guests to book. The platform was initially created as part of this sharing economy sort of concept that came up in the past, 10 to 15 years, but quickly morphed into a much more profit-driven enterprise, allowing people to rent out their properties for pretty successful amounts of money usually. Airbnb also has other competitors, so a lot of people have heard of Vrbo or VRBO, which all offer sort of unique alternatives to a traditional hotel stay that you would experience with most trips that you would take. In terms of the pros, like I mentioned, right, unique properties that are usually hard to find within typical hotel chains can be available through Airbnb. So depending on the location that you're going to, you may find some really interesting places to stay. And that's really where I've found most of my success when I've used Airbnb in the past. Also, I find that their platform, both their website and their mobile app, are relatively easy to use. It updates quickly. It allows you to sort of collaborate with other travelers who may be coming along with you. And it makes it really easy for you to pick out the property that's going to be best suited for the potential trip that you're taking. The other thing is it has a very large quantity of properties at this point. So starting out, there weren't quite as many properties to choose from, but as time goes on, you'll find that in any given location, even some very rural areas, there may be hundreds of different options for you depending on sort of what time of year it is and how busy that particular season is. The other big benefit I've found is when I have a lot of people that I need to have stay for a particular trip. This happens around, the holiday season, for example, when I have to have my family for Christmas. We've had experiences where we've stayed in a much larger property, whereas if we were at a hotel, we would have to rent multiple hotel rooms and it just wouldn't be the same experience. The other big benefit too, and this is something that a lot of people like Airbnb for, is that it makes you feel more like a local, and that you have a local home. So you can kind of blend into the environment a little bit and feel like you actually live in that particular location for, a week or 2 weeks, whatever your trip time is. Now let's talk about the cons. So a couple of the big cons relate to how Airbnb hosts and guests and Airbnb, the corporation, interacts. So just so you're aware, hosts do not actually have to answer directly to Airbnb. And then Airbnb does not actually have to be responsible directly for their host's actions. So this creates an interesting dynamic in which, Airbnb doesn't have quite as much recourse against those properties that a corporation would have against, a hotel property, for example. The other thing that I find that can be a little bit difficult is there are many times when property owners may actually employ local managers who vary in quality and response time. So usually they're relatively good, but other times they may be managing multiple properties for Airbnb. So I would say that makes a difference sometimes in the experience. And then the other big con that comes up a lot, especially when you're traveling to really popular tourist destinations, places in Europe, it takes up housing supply for local people within that particular community. So there are cases like this all across Europe in particular where A city will have a significant amount of their housing supply taken up by short-term rentals like Airbnb. And as a result, they try to limit the amount of Airbnbs that can be purchased and registered within that particular location. I also want to share what are the best tips, and I'm going to show some examples on screen for finding a great Airbnb. So after staying at more than 25 Airbnbs for personal trips for myself, I feel like there's a few things that I really look out for when I'm trying to find a great Airbnb. So here are my tips that will hopefully ensure you have a stay that's both safe and also enjoyable for yourself and whoever might be coming with you as well. So my first tip is read each Airbnb posting carefully just to ensure you understand exactly what the property is like. What you'll find is the pictures are usually taken in a way to make the property seem the best it possibly can be, which is great, right? However, you may find that you believe that property is all to yourself when it's actually shared between multiple people, for example. It could also be that the Airbnb host actually lives on site. Things like that could actually change the way that you think about that particular property. So a few other ones, right? Is this an apartment? Is it a full house? Are there neighbors? Does it have enough beds for everyone that you're looking for? So just make sure that you really understand what the property is about. Look through every picture and imagine how that matches the description. So whenever I look through that, I look at the entire description and then I go through all the pictures and see, okay, it sleeps 6 people, but there's actually only 2 bedrooms that I can see. What would be the other 2 people staying on? Maybe it's a pull-out couch. Maybe it's an air mattress that they have in there. All of that is a possibility. And it's sort of up to the host as to what they want to do with the amount of people they can fit in that particular space. I always only pick properties with high reviews. So there are very, very few times that I pick properties that are below like a 4.7 or a 4.8 out of 5 stars. And just to ensure that there are really recent reviews that aren't actually trending downward. We'll talk about that in a little bit, talking about the red flags. I also make sure that I read all of the reviews as much as possible, and just make sure that whatever they rated the property as actually matches what the review says. A lot of people don't want to rate a particular property very low, but they may have additional criticisms within the review itself that will give you a better indication of how their experiences may have been bad or good, depending on sort of how that played out. And it's not necessarily a reflection on the 5-point scale that they place on that particular property. And then the last tip that I always tell people is every single host or property manager will have to have some kind of profile on Airbnb, and they're able to be rated if they go and stay at a property as well. So I always find it useful to look at their profile, see where they've stayed before, see if they have a rating, and what that rating is, because that will give you a good indication if they're good to work with, especially if there's a problem that comes up. So that's a good segue into the red flags to watch out for. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but one really important one is lack of recent reviews, right? So this could indicate that maybe no one stayed there recently, but it could also indicate that there's been a lack of positive experiences and those individuals just didn't want to leave a review. Also, the other big thing is properties that have more and more negative reviews just in the past month or past few weeks, for example. So I had an experience relatively recently where we found that the reviews kept getting worse and worse. We still ended up staying at the property and the reviews were actually truthful to our experience, and we probably should have listened to them ahead of time. Although it wasn't a complete wash in terms of a trip, that was something that was very much playing out within the negative reviews that we saw just in the past few weeks. I also look pretty closely at hosts who respond to negative reviews and how they respond to them. So there are a lot of hosts that just don't respond to the reviews at all, which I think is probably my preferred sort of look when I approach Airbnb reviews. But some may want to clarify those experiences a little bit more, especially if they're negative ones. But oftentimes they may be combative responses. So if I see that, usually that's a red flag that I won't be staying at that property, because you don't know how the host is going to react if there is some kind of issue that comes up. We talked about checking the host ratings earlier, but if you find that the host has a low rating, I would advise you to look at a different property at that point that's not with that same host. Another red flag that comes up a lot for people is properties that ask you not to reveal that you're an Airbnb guest to other tenants or neighbors within the same vicinity, right? So this is especially comes up in like a condo building, an apartment building, places like that where sometimes you're not supposed to have an Airbnb and people might do it anyway. So if that's the case, then I would steer clear of it because there may be issues with other neighbors. There may be issues trying to get into the Airbnb, and it's going to be a lot more of a difficult experience because you're going to have to try to pretend that you live in that space for real. And then the last thing I would just say is, just make sure that if you find a property with very few reviews, which, can happen, right? If it's a new Airbnb, it might not be that it is a bad place, but just doesn't have many reviews. I avoid those usually. To be quite honest, I try to look for things that have at least 50 reviews, depending on the location, right? If it's in a major city, you would expect it to probably have more than 100. So keep all of that in mind as you're looking out for red flags when you're looking through the reviews, checking into the property a little bit more as well. The last thing I wanted to cover is in relation to what to do if there is an issue, right? So my go-to is always, number one, contacting the host or the property manager directly through the Airbnb platform. So why is it important to contact them through the Airbnb platform? The main reason is that Airbnb can actually track that response, can track your request, and it's all on record. So if anything comes up that becomes a major issue, then you'll be able to show Airbnb as the corporation that the hosts or the property managers were non-compliant with your requests. So that's one tip, right? Never ever reach out to the Airbnb host or manager by phone or text, because those are things that are less easily tracked by the corporation itself. If you can't resolve the issue, I always advise people to reach out to Airbnb, their support for potential assistance with that. So depending on what that particular issue may be, they may receive, some degree of assistance from, compensation. They may, provide you reimbursement for some kind of alternative accommodation, things like that, that can make sure that, it smooths out your trip overall. So I would encourage you to contact them if the Airbnb host or property manager is unresponsive to whatever issue that's come up. And then the last thing I wanted to mention on this is something that's come up a lot in relation to finding cameras, especially in private spaces within some Airbnbs. This happens in places all over the world, but we've seen a lot of it happening in the United States just in the past couple of years. So if there's something illegal going on that is directly harmful to you, I would say your first call should be to law enforcement, right? I wouldn't contact the host because obviously, they're going to be caught in a situation where they're breaking the law. And I wouldn't contact Airbnb either because it's unlikely they're going to assist you directly with those kind of complaints. So in terms of that, I would call law enforcement directly. And this goes for if you find, some kind of hidden camera within your bedroom or within a bathroom. Those should be considered private spaces that don't have those kind of things in them. You should note that there are a lot of Airbnbs for security reasons that may have CCTV cameras outside of the property that may point at public spaces. So, depending on the location that you're in, depending on that country, that particular city, there may be different laws about whether you can actually do that or not. So that's a brief overview of how to pick an Airbnb safely. So that's it for the video overall. But if you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe. I really appreciate the fact that you guys are enjoying the videos. If you have any questions, feel free to add them down in the comment section below, and I'll try to answer them as they come up. Otherwise, thanks so much for watching. Have a good rest of your day. Goodbye.